First, Peyton off the field. The media has been all over Manning this week, and after the Broncos' Week 1 19-13 win over the Ravens, Manning has struggled of late. Since Week 11 of last season, including the playoffs, he has nearly as many interceptions, 9, as touchdown passes, 11, and his total QBR, 51, is 20th out of 32 QBs with 100 attempts in that span. Peyton sounded off when asked if he's on the injury report for this week's upcoming game against the Chiefs.
You know, my thoughts on the injury report. I think the media should have to do an injury report as well. I think all you guys have to. I'd like to create it myself, you know, and just, to think about. I'm going to put down what I think y'all's injuries are. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves around here that we did actually win the game, that we are 1-0. Thank goodness, because I can't imagine what it would have been like had we lost the game. You know, I'm sure offensively, I speak for a lot of guys, that we certainly want to play better, and feel like, that Thursday probably couldn't come soon enough to have another opportunity, and I think everybody wants to do their job better, but at the same time, we felt we did enough to help us win on Sunday.
Stephen A., is this the beginning of the end for number 18?
Well, listen, I think it's the beginning of the end, but it has nothing to do with his performance in Week 1. The Baltimore Ravens have a good defense. There's some question marks about them now that Suggs has gone down, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show. But I definitely think that there's an overreaction as it pertains to his performance in Game 1 of this NFL season. What I think Peyton Manning needs to take into consideration is that people are looking at the last 4 games of last year, his performance against the Buffalo Bills, his performance against the San Diego Chargers, the 4 interceptions he threw in a loss at Cincinnati, the relative, pedestrian performance against the Oakland Raiders, and then to end the last regular season, and then, of course, the performance in the playoff game against the Indianapolis Colts. He did not seem like himself. Father Time seems to be knocking on his door just a touch, at least, just tapping on his door a little bit, and I think that's why people are asking those questions. But at the same time, I don't blame Peyton Manning for being a bit annoyed and perturbed over it all. This is a guy that completed 66% of his passes last year, threw for over 4,700 yards. When you consider the numbers that he put up just last year alone, that's better than most quarterbacks have done in their careers. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I definitely think he has every right to be a bit annoyed. He just needs to remember that we're not measuring him against other quarterbacks. We're measuring him against the greatness of himself. And we're wondering how much he has left. We've heard about the numbness or the lack of feeling in his fingers. You know that he can't run with the football. You're wondering about the back and the hips and all of that other stuff. And so because of that, just the cumulative effect of age, attrition, the injuries that he's had, the surgeries that he's had, along with the level of regression we've witnessed, particularly since he got beat up against St. Louis, it's not something that we can ignore. Now, his playoff performance was the hamstring had a lot to do with that, because if your hamstring ain't right and you're out there throwing with a bum hamstring and you can't throw the football, you're not going to be able to throw the football effectively, and we understand that. But again, he just needs to remember we're measuring him against the greatness that he himself has put on display for the better part of the last 2 decades, not what Peyton Manning is capable of doing compared to most other quarterbacks in the NFL, because we know he's still elite compared to most.
So, bottom line, what's your gut feeling here? Is he about to fade into the sunset sooner than later?
I personally, that's my personal belief. I don't have any knowledge of it, but my personal belief is that this is the end for Peyton Manning, that he will retire after this season. That's just what I think.
I don't disagree with that, just conjecture. We're just guessing. But I'm with you about that, because after this season, he turns 40 years of age in March. So could I see the great Peyton Manning, the all-time great Peyton Manning, saying, okay, that's enough? I could if they went out on a pretty to very high note this year, and I think they still have a chance to go out on a high note this year. I am definitely not writing off Peyton Manning for this football season. I still have them winning this division. I do not have them winning the AFC just because I like the Patriots. But do I think they could be a threat to the? You better believe I do. I don't see dramatic decline in Peyton Manning's game. All those games you so eloquently listed, I still, man, I don't know. Everybody goes back to week 11 last year. Remember, you pointed out at St. Louis, he got rocked, man. He got beat up at St. Louis. He was only sacked a couple of times, but it seemed like they hit him 6 or 8 big times. And they lost the football game. There's no shame there because we saw what happened to the Seahawks yet again in St. Louis this past Sunday. And yet he bounced right back from that game, beat up as he was, and he had a big game against Miami. Then he went to Kansas City, where he has to go again tomorrow night, and they won 29-16, and he had a pretty good game. And then I know about your games that you listed, the Buffalo at San Diego. It seems like it was his groin that got pulled at San Diego. And then he struggled down the stretch, and he got outplayed at home in a playoff game by Andrew Luck, which was significant. But just a year before, he outplayed Tom Brady at home in a big playoff game. And then he got to the Super Bowl, and obviously we know what happened. He got bullied by the Seattle Seahawks and blown off the field in the Super Bowl, an all-time embarrassment that we both agreed upon. But, again, I don't think there was any shame in what happened Sunday. A lot of people think the Baltimore Ravens could be in the Super Bowl this year with or without Terrell Suggs. So I thought Peyton played okay. He did throw the 1 pick six, and then Joe Flacco canceled that one with his own pick six. So, Stephen A., after all the offseason talk about what will the new coach do, the whole new staff comes in, new regime change, will they try to run the football? He still threw it, did Peyton, 40 times against the Baltimore Ravens, and they ran it only 25 times in a very close game that ended up 19-13. He no longer has Julius Thomas, obviously. He no longer has Wes Welker. So it's Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, and Emmanuel caught 8 and Demaryius caught 7 on Sunday. It's business as usual for Peyton Manning. So when I hear all the conjecture about has he lost a lot of velocity, especially in his deep balls, and I look at the deep balls, some of them have been overthrown, some underthrown, but some have been overthrown. And my question to all those doubters is, when did Peyton Manning ever have a cannon to begin with? I mean, when he was a rookie, he didn't have a cannon. He's never had a cannon. And I'm still sitting here to tell you, Stephen A., that I think 25 out of 32 teams would right now take Peyton Manning as their quarterback. That's how good he is. Well, and obviously he's better than Brock Osweiler because that's his backup in Denver. So I think the Broncos are going to be just fine at his age 39 season.
Well, I hear where you're coming from, but you got to remember what I said. Number one, clearly we expect the Denver Broncos to be formidable. I definitely expect them to win the AFC West, and we know that Peyton Manning is elite. But I keep saying we're not measuring him against other quarterbacks in the NFL because we know he'd be top 5. We're measuring him against himself. Not to mention the fact we're taking into account issues of attrition, getting beat up. What kind of year is he going to have here? Now, let's go back to those games last year. Yes, he did get beat up by St. Louis in Week 11. You pointed out how he showed up against the Miami Dolphins the very next game. Yep. Yeah, but they gave the ball to C.J. Anderson 27 times. He ran for 167 yards. The following game against Kansas City, he threw 4 touchdowns in that game against Miami, and we understand that. But it wasn't like he had a 300- or 400-yard game. C.J. Anderson was running all over the place, and then obviously Peyton Manning would finish the deal. The very next game against the Kansas City Chiefs, well, what happened? C.J. Anderson rushed the ball 32 times for 168 yards. So you're talking about a Peyton Manning squad with all the aforementioned individuals, the Wes Welkers, the Julius Thomases, the Demaryius Thomases, the Emmanuel Sanders of the world, etc. And you had a guy named C.J. Anderson, who was relatively unknown, rush the football 59 times in 2 games. That's not something that customarily happens with a Peyton Manning. The belief was it happened because he got beat up and hadn't fully recovered. I don't know when the hamstring injury ultimately kicked in, but once that kicked in, he was hampered a little bit as well. And a lot of people, talked about how that may have detrimentally affected or impacted his performance against the Indianapolis Colts in the postseason. So when we look at Peyton Manning and you sit there and you take those last 4 regular season games and then that playoff performance against Indianapolis, and then you couple that with what we've seen transpire in week 1 of this NFL season, then you take into account the 39 years of age approaching 40, the 4 back surgeries, the hamstring injury, the hit, and then skip this nugget that you did not bring up. How do we know he's happy with Gary Kubiak and John Elway? Remember, in the immediate aftermath of the loss, of the win against Baltimore this past Sunday, we heard Peyton Manning speak in ways that he hadn't spoken before about how they've got to get on the same page. I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but everybody was talking about how Peyton seemed very un-Peyton-like in terms of highlighting what a struggle it was for him. Because what we're witnessing is John Elway and Gary Kubiak, at least from the outside looking in, it appears as if they're trying to run more of the show instead of leaving that to Peyton Manning. And that's an adjustment for Peyton Manning. He didn't have to do that in Indianapolis with Tony Dungy. He didn't have to do that under John Fox in Denver. But suddenly Gary Kubiak comes there. That's John Elway's boy. And Gary Kubiak, with all due respect, who proved absolutely positively nothing as a head coach in Houston for the Texans those years. All those years he was coaching that team, they made the playoffs twice. That's it. But Gary Kubiak is running the show in Denver. And oh, by the way, he's trying to tell Peyton Manning what to do on the offensive side of the ball. All I'm saying is those things, if there's any truth to what's being purported, then you never know what kind of an impact that might have on Peyton Manning, because he may very well say the cumulative effect of all of that, I don't really need this, let me move on.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but the numbers speak differently on Sunday. Again, he did throw it 40 times. They ran it only 25 times. So it wasn't like you took the ball completely out of Peyton's hands in a low-scoring, close defense and run the football kind of 19-13 game. So
that's fair.
I get it. I get that Kubiak might want more control. It's hard for us to know.
That's where I'm going.
You know, yeah, I get it. And Peyton can't freelance as much in Audible as much. Not as much Omaha going on. I don't know about that, but it looked pretty much the same to me, even though Peyton did speak after the game. It's all new to him. Some of the cogs are new in the system. So I get that, but it still looked Peyton-esque enough to me that I'm not going to panic on his part, overreact. And I must say also, I love the fact that Peyton Manning was testy yesterday. He was a little chippy. We didn't get the Saturday Night Live Peyton. We didn't get the affable ambassador for the Broncos and the National Football League. We didn't get the Papa John's Peyton Manning yesterday. We got a guy who had a little chip on his shoulder. Well, good for him and good for them, because they need him to have a chip on his shoulder. They're going into hostile territory tomorrow night, Kansas City. This is a huge division game for them.
Yeah, but 2 primary targets in Wes Welker and Julius Thomas are gone. And so when you look at Peyton Manning, and like you said, he came into the league and he didn't have the greatest arm in the world. When you take 2 mid-range targets, I'll use that word mid-range in terms of guys, whether it be, you know, in the middle of the field, short passes, etc. You take those weapons against him and you're forcing him to throw outside to the Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomases of the world. That could be a bit problematic for all we know. We simply don't know at this particular moment in time. But there is no denying the fact that what we've seen, or what we're seeing from Peyton Manning, we're not accustomed to seeing all the time. So again, it may not be a drop-off. It may be a change in system. All I'm saying is the combination of all of it. When you're 39 years old, approaching 40, and you've gotten beat up in your career, even though he didn't get beat up that much because he doesn't really take too many licks, the reality is that you may decide, I don't need this anymore, no matter how much you love this game. And it's not like Peyton Manning is going to be without a future in football. We love 2-man teams on Monday Night Football and all that stuff. How much you want to make a bet? Peyton Manning will get any job he wants in the sport of professional football once he steps away from the playing field. I don't care what it is. If Peyton Manning wants to do it, somebody will make sure it happens. That's how much he means to the NFL.
I'm just fine with Coach Gruden in my Monday night box. That's just me.
So am I.
Okay.
So am I. So am I.
All right.